The legislation committee will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard.
Present.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Here.
Alderman Ogilvy.
Here.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Present.
Alderman Vaccaro. President Reed. 8 present.
Okay, before us is Board Bill 73. Oh,
Almost.
coming around the table.
No, it isn't.
I was wondering.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There it comes. Okay, here we go.
Okay, before us now is Board Bill 73, sponsored by Alderwoman Howard and Murphy. Alderwoman Howard, you are welcome to present.
Board Bill 73 would provide a more expedient way of transferring title from properties that are sold on the courthouse steps, so to speak, for back taxes. As it stands now, people can purchase the property and not convey it to their possession. And I will introduce Mr. Dale Sweet to go in detail how this process works. Would you mind?
Thank you, Alderman.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Sweet.
Morning, Chairman, Acting Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. I'm an attorney and,
Can I interject real quick?
yes,
It would be helpful for me at some
Yep.
point for you to walk through how it works now and then specifically what
Right.
we're changing.
Of course.
But go
of
ahead.
course. Well, and there's a tiny bit of history. I'll try to be brief about it out of respect for everybody's time. So if I'm the buyer of property, I'm the grantee, and the person selling me the property is the grantor. The city of St. Louis is the only county in the state of Missouri that requires the signature of the buyer or grantee on a deed in order for it to be recorded in the recorder's office here. And although I was probably eating Gerber food at the time, in the 1970s there was a problem where folks were abandoning their property in St. Louis and they would deed it to somebody who didn't exist, or they would deed it to Mayor Cervantes in order to dump their property and make it our problem as opposed to the property owner's problem. They couldn't be tracked down for a building code violation or a nuisance activity, et cetera, et cetera. So your predecessors passed a law called the Deeds Law that requires a deed being recorded in the city to have the signature of the buyer or grantee. And that's been on the books for 40-something years, and we're the only county in Missouri that requires this. I would say that this is a good thing. I'm an attorney, I practice in real estate law. I'm also a community, neighborhoody person, and I pay attention to the growing issues of vacancy and so on that we're all concerned about, and unfindable landlords and property owners and so on. So you asked, how does it work now? If I go to buy property from the sheriff, and I have a little example here, I don't have a ton of copies, but if you all would be so good as to pass these around and share them
Give
with
me
all.
more copies.
Thanks, Carol. So this is an example of a court order from earlier this month where my client, Carondelet Community Betterment Federation, purchased a dilapidated property on Idaho Avenue from the sheriff for back taxes. So the collector sued the property. When the taxes didn't get paid, the sheriff of the city of St. Louis put it up for public auction. CCBF attended the auction and bid on the property, paid the sheriff, and then the next step is they went to court and asked the judge to determine that the price that they paid for this property was fair and adequate, that appropriate notice was given to the lien holders, the taxpayer, and so on, before this government confiscation of property. Because we have a requirement in the city that the grantee must sign the deed, this court order orders the sheriff to provide a deed and give it to my client CCBF, transferring and conveying this dilapidated property on Idaho Avenue. So the court orders the sale confirmed, and then the sheriff prepares a deed. At that point, a representative of CCBF needs to go into the sheriff's office, sign the deed, the sheriff records the deed, and then the assessor updates the records to show that CCBF is the owner of the property. That's how it works now. Board Bill 79? Board Bill 79 would exempt, 73, I'm sorry, folks. Board Bill 73 would exempt a sheriff's deed from the grantee signature requirement. Remember, going back 40 years, the reason we need that grantee signature is so that we actually have a real person who has accepted the property and not a straw party or Mayor Pelker or so on, right? And so in order to prevent real estate fraud. And what we're dealing with in the context of a sheriff's tax sale is a person who is actually showing up, showing their ID, signing up to bid, bidding, paying, and so on. They have absolutely accepted the property. They are not a person who is, getting this dumped on them and so on, right? So it would be convenient for a tax sale purchaser to skip this step and so on. It is unnecessary, and and this is not a case of fraud. Now we get to the actual problem that we'll fix in order to, I mentioned this would be more convenient for folks. Well, that's not what we're here about. We're here about problems where folks fly in from out of town, buy properties from the sheriff, and then they take their sweet time going to court to get the kind of court order I'm showing you an example of. During that time, the property stays listed on the assessor's database in the delinquent taxpayer's name. She may be deceased. It may be a defunct company. We may have no way to find that person if we need to drag him into the police station or we need to drag him into municipal court and so on, right? And so this out-of-town slumlord purchaser, I use quotes there, who's buying this property, there's no automatic mechanism to force them to go to court. That's state law. We can't fix that here, okay? But what we can fix is the next step that they take their sweet time doing or never do, and that's going into the sheriff's office to sign these deeds so that the sheriff can record it down in room 126, so that the assessor can pick up who the new owner is and so on. So I'm picturing one particular property owner in St. Louis who sends an agent into the courthouse, buys these properties, and then never goes in and signs the deeds.
And then tries to sell them.
We can't figure out who owns the property in the meantime. The money that the tax sale purchaser paid, in this example it's $9,900 that the nonprofit paid to the sheriff for the property, is sitting in the comptroller's office. It never goes to the collector's office. It never puts books on library shelves, and it never educates our children. So in this particular instance, the deeds law back from the early 70s is not only unnecessary, but it's also making happen exactly what it was supposed to prevent. And so the Board Bill 73 would exempt a deed prepared by the sheriff by order of a judge in our circuit court from the necessity of having a grantee come in and sign it. This would expedite the process so we can actually figure out who owns these properties, get the tax money out of the sheriff and the comptroller's hands, over to the collector's hands, out to the library and the school board and so on. I'm totally available for questions. I appreciate the sponsors of the bill, and I appreciate you having me here today.
Additionally, this would only apply to sheriff sale deeds.
True. Provided, executed pursuant to a court order. So this isn't when the sheriff goes to sell his personal residence or anything.
Right.
This is only when a judge says, sheriff, give this nonprofit, give this tax sale purchaser a deed to this property. And frankly, folks, we don't require the heirs to run in and sign a deed after the probate court determines who owns a property when someone dies in the city. We don't require people who were getting a divorce in our family court to come in and sign a document. A judge's order can absolutely affect title to real estate in Missouri. And the little impediment that's, still hanging around in our deeds law that we hope to fix is to exempt only a sheriff's deed provided pursuant to a court order.
And I just want to speak to what happened in my ward. I had a fellow that bought property or presumed to buy property off the sheriff's sale, then was going around trying to sell it when it had never been transferred into his name. And it was like, how can he, but he could. But he could. I mean,
guess he was
it's
trying
not
to sell
really
his
legitimate, but
interest in the property that he didn't actually have record title.
to own, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it could have jumped owners. In other words, he could have brought that person down and said, okay, this is the owner and they're gonna sign off on this.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess what that guy was trying to do is transfer his tax sale interest to another person. And meanwhile, this is all sort of going on. It's kind of like the gun show
And the
loophole,
grass,
isn't it?
and the grass
Right?
is this high and,
Oh, sure.
there's building code violations and there's nobody to hold accountable.
Well, you're sending building code violations to a dead person or a delinquent taxpayer or somebody who's in a nursing home. or-
Right.
Yeah.
So. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm finished.
And so we're just adding this sentence at the bottom, the highlighted sentence on the second page.
For the bill, yeah.
Yes, so I mean, the first paragraph's a little bit, well, I mean, this is all, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
That the
yeah,
amendment is just that line.
that's right. We're
Not the
changing
whole portion.
paragraph B of Section 3 of Ordinance 56-141 that says, when the sheriff executes a deed pursuant to court order, we don't need a grantee to come in and sign it.
Okay, we can go around and ask if there are questions of committee members. Alderman Boyd.
Sure, I have a technical question on page 1, line 3. What's that blank? What goes in that blank? It's supposed to be a date.
We need to find out the date when Ordinance 65038 was either signed into law or approved by the Board of Aldermen, or whichever date goes in there. Maybe that's something that Mr. Galley can help us out with.
Why wouldn't we have that done before we introduce the bill? Okay, I'm curious. You said,
Wait a minute. Mr. Galley, can you?
Yeah, I'm looking right now, so
Yeah.
the effective date was 10/26/2001, and that's for 653-308, is that correct?
65038.
650-308.
It's 503.
It was 2000.
And the bill says
2001?
There's not an effective date online. That may be why.
The approval date's probably different than.
approved on,
Oh,
Yeah,
It's
this
blank.
says approved on that one when
yeah,
it
it's
became
intent, yeah, it's
effective.
not its effective date that's in here, it's the approval.
yeah, the effective date when the mayor signed
Right.
it.
So this is
Well, it was
when
approved 7/21/2000. It was
Seven-
third read and finally passed 7/21/2000. Sorry, I'm not even on the committee. I'll shut up.
It
you
was
got the
signed by the
big-
mayor on 8/9/2000.
Okay, that's about
So when we
2000.
say approved, the bill says approved.
Let's go with 8/9/2000.
Yeah, that's when it
Yeah.
would become effective.
Effective, yeah.
Nine.
All right, I'm gonna offer Amendment 1 to Board Bill 73. We're going to amend line 3 of page 1 to say approved on August,
21.
what was it?
August 9th.
Nine.
August
Do we have the
29th.
exact?
Yeah. they should.
2000.
So we
2000.
didn't have it before, that's why it's not in
Yeah.
here.
I'm gonna make a motion to approve Amendment 1.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on Amendment 1.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy.
Aye.
Alderwoman Navarro.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro. President Reed. 8 aye votes. I'm sorry, 7.
All right, Amendment 1 is approved.
Okay.
Thank you, Alderman Boyd.
Can I ask
Good
another?
question. You can ask another question if you'd like.
First of all, I think this makes all the sense in the world. But I'm curious, you had made a statement about there's money sitting over in the comptroller's office that can't go over to the collector's office because the deed has not actually transferred. I mean, the grantee hasn't signed on it. Do we have a clue how many deeds have not transferred and how much money is sitting over there by chance?
No idea. That would be a question for the sheriff's office. I know that there are dozens. They have a couple of drawers in a filing cabinet, Alderman, that are in particular. The deed is the last step in transferring the title to the person, so they
Right.
hang on to the money. Because if it has to be undone or
Gotcha.
whatever else, right, then we can't take it back off the library shelf or out of the penguin's mouth,
Gotcha.
right? So yeah, it's certainly dozens. I don't know how many.
Okay, just curious. Thank you. No further question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'm gonna skip past Alderman Howard. Alderwoman Hubbard?
I just have a quick question. I know you mentioned that it seemed like it's something of convenience, but I guess maybe I'm just not understanding why, even at that last step, we would require someone to come in and sign, or could they like electronically sign, or what? Give me the real big hurdle with someone not coming in to sign.
Well, so, I mean, there's a football player who sends an agent in to buy these properties and then doesn't mow his grass and so on, right? Rents the properties out and so on, allows them to deteriorate, doesn't get occupancy permits, we have no idea who lives there and so on. And he's able to do that because we have this little thing hanging around since the 70s that requires him to come in and sign a deed, even though there's been a court order with a judge ordering the sheriff to convey the property to him. We still need his signature.
It couldn't be OLP, could it?
It could be,
Yeah. And then he lets him go back on the tax sale
sometimes.
sometimes.
Or the collector moves to,
Yeah, it's a mess.
No further questions.
Alderwoman Murphy?
I guess mine would just be a similar thing that, like Alderwoman Howard said. I had cases where I had property in my neighborhood where we're sending things to people that don't exist anymore or have lost something in a bankruptcy or whatever, and we can never get the proper fines or whatever for, the property's shape and everything to the right person. And it took me, I want to say 3 years on one particular property. Once it was all cleared up, somebody bought the place and rehabbed it and it sold within, I would say, 3 months. But it took me 4 years to get to that point because of not knowing who actually owned or, was going to take responsibility for the debts on it and whatnot. So that's all. I'm in favor of expediting this. That's all.
Okay, Alderwoman Navarro?
No questions.
Alderwoman Middlebrook?
No questions.
Alderwoman Howard, would you like to?
Actually, a follow-up question.
Certainly,
Before she
Alderman Wood.
closes. Dale, out of curiosity, let's suppose this entity bought it, LLC, and you check Secretary of State's record, they know, they're defunct, they've been dissolved. What is the only way to cure that? And let's say it has been sitting out there 3 or 4 years, like Alderwoman Murphy was saying. What's the cure for that? Is it eminent domain?
so the problem is that we can't figure out who owns the property, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the tax sale, or it does?
No, the tax sale, it was bought out of the tax sale, but the person never came and signed on it. So the money is sitting in the comptroller's office and it's in limbo. But you find out the company has been dissolved, or heck, maybe the person died that never came to sign off on it. How do you cure that problem?
It would be the same problem that we have regardless of a tax sale. If a person dies owning real estate, then what do? We have to probate the thing. We have to wait a certain number of years. If a company dissolves and so on, generally, the tax sale is the net that catches those kinds of problems. So the dissolved company, the shareholders are in Hawaii or wherever else, they leave behind their property in the 22nd Ward or whatever, right? It's generally speaking, the remedy is that we have to wait for the taxes to go unpaid and the sheriff to sell it, unfortunately.
Cycle back
And
around.
then, I guess, just as an add-on question, once the sheriff's sale takes place, that cleanses the title?
If it's done properly,
If it's
by the
done properly.
collector, sheriff, the purchaser's attorney, and so on, yes.
Okay.
It's a matter of due process. It's a question of whether all the lien holders or heirs or whoever a notice was attempted to those folks prior to the tax sale. Yeah.
Okay. At
You're
this time,
welcome to
Mr.
close.
Chair, I would like to close and ask the committee to pass out of committee Board Bill number 73 with a do pass recommendation.
Certainly. I move we pass Board Bill 73 as amended with a due pass recommendation.
Second?
It's been moved
Previous row?
and seconded. There's been a request for previous roll. Any objections to previous roll? Going once, going twice. Previous roll is approved. Board Bill 73 as amended passes. And the legislation committee is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I co-sponsor?